All right, well, that video was just going crazy, so why don't we just go ahead and go live and skip the countdown. Welcome to Race in America. The conversation continues. I am joined tonight by an incredible panel of folks that I consider to be esteemed colleagues. We're so grateful that you're here tonight. For the next few moments, we are going to dive into a conversation about race, and specifically going to dive into a conversation about race and the intersection of people of color and a perspective versus some perspectives of white folks like me. And I have come tonight with some questions, and I hope that you have come tonight with some questions as well. We will be looking at the chat, looking at the comments, and are encouraging you to pose your questions as well, and we will get to as many as possible. And before we just jump right in, why don't we introduce ourselves? Josephine, I think you are up there first in order, so in that little Brady Bunch box that we have going here. So Josephine, why don't you introduce yourselves to us?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Josephine Ruff from Vestavia Hills, Alabama. I am the mother of two teenage daughters who keep me very busy. Just published my first novel. I'm so excited about that I'm telling the world. It's called Broken Soul. Just released last month, so we are excited to have this out on the market. So if you want one, go on over to Amazon and do that. Broken Soul by Josephine Ruff. Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me. And I won't talk about Broken Soul tonight unless you want me to. But I'm excited to be here with you guys today. Thank you.
I do want to make sure, though, that people know about that, and we'll put that information out there as well so that everybody can find it, so that they can read it as well. And it is, I have not yet read it, I have to admit, but it is on my to-do list. I can't wait. And I have been impressed by all the reviews I've seen.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Chuck, introduce yourself.
Hey, everyone. This is Chuck Davis from Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, I've known Kevin for a long time. Oh, my goodness. We go back to when I used to live in Birmingham, and he was one of the pastors at the church that me and my family attended. Kevin, that was, oh, my goodness, maybe 15, 16 years ago or so. But, hey, I'm looking to engage in this conversation and really encourage questions to come in. And I think as a society, we do not do this enough. So I'm here just to be a part of the conversation. So really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Chuck. We go further back than I want to admit, because it means I'm getting old.
Same.
Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
What's up, everybody? Mike Dorsey here from Baltimore, Maryland, and it is awesome to hang out with this esteemed group of panelists. And Kevin, look, we went to college together, so I think we've known each other since we were 18, 19 years old, either indirectly or directly. So we getting old, bro. We getting old, but no, it's awesome just to see how you are growing and flourishing in your ministry, and then also just having met Josephine and Chuck. I think we know each other for 2 years now, and it's just been nice to watch you guys from a distance. And Josephine, I have your book on my list of so I'm trying to remember why I didn't actually buy it, but it has nothing to do with anything, but I think I got distracted, seriously. So I will make sure I get it this week. So I can't wait to do it. And we'll definitely have to have you on Headspace with Dr. Mike so we can discuss it, so we can really talk about that. So love it.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for taking the time tonight, y'all. Tasha was unable at the last minute to be with us, is a little bit under the weather. So we'll get her in on this whenever we do this again. I don't know, in 6 months or a year. It's amazing. It has been almost 2.5 years now? Has it been 2 years? Is it 3 years?
We've done this 3 times. I think that's third. I think so.
It's been a while.
It's 3.
I have learned a lot, and I still have a lot to learn. So yeah, we were discussing a little bit before we came in the announcement over the weekend of the Supreme Court justice that President Biden is about to nominate, or did nominate, I guess, Ketanji Brown Jackson. And, President Biden said that he was going to nominate a Black female to the bench, which would be, to my understanding, the first Black female to sit on the United States Supreme Court if her nomination is confirmed. And as I was thinking about that, one of the things that I have heard asked in circles, maybe quietly in my areas of influence, is this question: Is it important? Is it important to have a Black woman on the bench? A lot of times, the things that I hear other folks who are white say is that we shouldn't see race, we shouldn't see color, and it feels wrong to some people to say we're going to select somebody for gender or for race rather than ability, I think, is the way I often hear it posed. And so let's just dive into the deep end, and who wants to tackle from the beginning?
Look, I mean, let's face it. The previous president, and this is not getting totally political, but let's keep it real. The previous president, he was committed to having a woman on the bench as well. While he didn't necessarily designate her to be a certain color, he did say that he wanted it to be a woman, and he wanted it, to be a more conservative in their leanings. And so I think that along the way, you're always going to have these arguments from people in regards to whether or not something should or shouldn't be. I think it's a long time coming. At the end of the day, my argument about Judge Brown Jackson is she is extremely qualified. As a matter of fact, she actually has some qualifications that if she was put on the list with some of the other ones that are on there, they may not have made it. I mean, just when you look at what she brings to the table, the fact that she has bench experience, she also clerked for the justice that she's going to be replacing. She has spent time as a public defender for the feds. I mean, that right there is a great perspective. And she went to undergrad and graduate school at Harvard. So, I mean, she has the credentials. And so, yeah, it's definitely important. We need that Supreme Court to look like America. So, yeah, that's what I think.
Absolutely. Representation is critical. And, regardless of whether it's at the Supreme Court or whether it's in Congress, your local school board, America is a diverse country, and it's very important that we do see our true selves, our complete selves, Kevin. I mean, when someone says you don't see color, that's just I don't know how to categorize that, but I know that when I see you, I see a white man who's a friend, who's a believer, who's a pastor, who's a great father, who's buff. You are complete. You are many, many things, right? So when we do see people in these different positions, it's important to note their complete selves. I mean, what they bring to the table.
So it's important. So it's okay to see color, you would say.
Yeah, so it's okay. I mean, the Lord created us with various colors, various ethnicities. And yeah, it's okay to see that. If you don't see it, what do you see?
Right.
I do echo what Mike and Chuck have said. This is America. We are all shades and all colors. And I think we need to have people that represent everybody in the country. A Black female will speak to issues in a way that a white female may not be able to, and she could speak to issues a way that a white male won't be able to speak to them. So, and she can look at things from a whole different perspective. So yes, she should be on the bench for sure. And I think this is a great start to somewhat making the bench look more like America.
So I guess, my, what do you hope would be 5, 10, 15 years from now? Is there anything, and I didn't prep you with this question, is there anything that that you would hope that she would bring to the bench, or that she would be able to be a part of deciding? Is there any issue, any decision, anything at all that you say this is this is really an area of law that this perspective is needed?
Yeah, voting rights. I mean, I live in Georgia, and post, the last election, we've had all sorts of things that seem to have just sprung out of nowhere as a result of a legal, critical election. We've had all sorts of things that have been gutted in terms of our laws, and laws created to push back on progress. And I'm hoping that, in time, that we could get some federal legislation or federal decisions that could offset some of these laws that are going into effect in the states around the union. So I think she will have a critical voice and be a deciding factor if that does come to play in the future.
I would also add to that criminal justice reform, clarifying, really starting to get from a legal standpoint, start raising the question of, all right, yes, we're going to interpret the Constitution, which is over 200 years old, right? And really start getting people to think critically about, perhaps these are some things the lawmakers need to be thinking about to adjust the laws to make them meet where we're at in 21st century America, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't want a person to just go up there with their personal biases, right? Because one of the things we get upset about is these personal bias, but look at the law for what it is. And so I think that there are some things, especially when we talk about systemic racism, criminal justice reform, especially when you have the word of defund the police, where I think that kind of got hijacked and kind of got misrepresented in the culture that we get. Because I don't think anybody who has common sense wants the police to be defunded. I think it's the concept of, are we really allocating the right resources to the right things, right? And so I just think that you having that voice on the bench, not to mention women's rights, right? I mean, women's rights are extremely, challenged. And Kevin, you and I, all of us, we come from a background where you were just supposed to be pro-life and you're supposed to be everything about that. But now that I'm older and I'm starting to see some things, it's like, yeah, I believe in that. But at the same time, I also believe that, what happened to the idea of letting a person make a choice for themselves, right? And, that's why, for instance, and this is going off topic a little bit, but it's the idea of, look, as a church, all of us are involved in church. Instead of us navigating and spending our time and effort into making legislation, why are we not spending more time and effort into teaching people and helping people grow in their relationship with the Lord, right? The Holy Spirit is the one that makes the difference, right? The Holy Spirit is the one that sets in and makes peace when there is no peace, and starts to allow you to tap into those things. And so I just think that having a person like Judge Jackson Brown, or Brown Jackson, is going to really make an impact and just really start changing the perspective of how people look at the laws of this land, and seeing how challenging folk that make the difference in changing those laws, making those effective. So absolutely.
One of the main concerns I would have is women's health issue. It's it's sad that we are still debating issues for women as if we cannot make choices for ourselves. And this is just, and the more rights that you take away, the more rights you'll be able to take away on down the road. So having a woman on the bench who can speak to issues or understand the issues of women's health better than men, I think that's going to be really critical on down the road.
Yeah.
I didn't expect you guys to have answers to that, to have answers on the spot. Wow. I'm impressed. Yeah. And Mike, what you said too, just really, when you kind of called me out about what we were taught, it's the first time I've ever thought about. A lot of times I think the things that I was taught growing up. I think you were maybe talking about religion, but I think we can include race, and so much is wrapped up into race, policing, women's health issues, voting rights. As you guys said, there are all of these things that intersect there in that conversation. And I was raised to have a very stringent sense of right and wrong on a lot of these topics and what was in and what was out. And the Bible was used to kind of support the perspective of what was right and what was wrong. And I think, what you alluded to and what I've come to find out is that a lot of the reasons why I was told something was right or something was wrong wasn't really because the Bible said it, but there were other things behind that. There was bigotry behind that. There was fear behind that. There was racism behind those things. And so I'm still on a journey of trying to unravel the things that I believe and whether or not I believe them because the Bible says that, or whether or not I was just told that the Bible said that, but it really didn't say that. And there was something else there that was behind it. So,
and Kevin, I appreciate you saying that. And I don't want to make sure the listeners understand that not everybody that falls into that argument are racist, right? Are people, they actually believe that. I think there are some people who just got caught up in what they were told, right? And kind of moved with it. I think in the scheme of things, when you start looking at some of the stuff that was in the background, you had a small percentage of folk that figured out, how do we control, right? The Bible was used as a weapon. And I think that's one of the issues why people fall away from it now, because they're just like, you're using this as a weapon. And there is nowhere in the Bible where it's supposed to be a weapon, right? As a matter of fact, when you think about it, when you start looking at the idea of God and how he wanted to set us up in a situation where we love him because we choose to love him, not because he makes us love him, right? And he established the law to kind of teach us how to handle him. But then he sent Jesus on the cross so that way, that idea of following the law, the heaviness and the load of that is not put on us, so that we can actually live an abundant and free life in him. I think that speaks volumes. And I think that we actually, those of us who are taught in the word, should actually be more mindful of the freedom that we have in Christ, not the freedom to go out and just do anything we feel like doing, but recognize that freedom exists. And I think that what happened was there were a group of folk who used the Bible as a way to control. I mean, think about back slave times. They justified slavery, right? They justified it. I mean, you can't justify slavery when you really understand the Bible, but they did because that was used. And even now we're hearing that, and we have folk who are coming through the ranks. And it's like, what amazes me is that Christianity is so strong within the Black community, right? In spite of that. And that goes to show how the gospel transcends all that. And so anyway, I could talk a long time about that, but
You said something that I loved, using the Bible to control. And as a pastor, I can confirm that the propensity to use the Bible to control is strong. It's tough to not do. And I would love to say that I haven't done it over the years ever. I'm sure I have.
You've done it. Everybody, I think anybody who preaches and is put in a place of leadership has done it. So I'm not necessarily knocking any one particular person. But
something that we have heard a lot about over the last year when it comes to control of information is public education and critical race theory and the teaching of what we're going to teach and what we're not going to teach about America. Is it wrong to teach the more difficult parts of American history? And should kids feel bad about their country or about their ancestors? What do you think should be taught from your perspective? What is important to know?
The truth.
The ugly truth. The ugly truth, whatever that ugly truth is. And I tell you, I have high schoolers in American history. I can't do it with them. it just glazed. Slavery was uncomfortable for people. Really, teach the ugly truth about slavery. Um, and even in the classroom, some of the things that they come home to tell me just make me want to holler. It's just horrible that there's no consider. You want to talk about, well, we don't want to make the white kids feel uncomfortable. When my daughters are in these classes and they're the only black kids in the class, they are feeling very uncomfortable
Whoa,
the
whoa,
way
whoa.
it's being taught as if
Talk about
slavery
that,
was
because
some.
that, you just blew my mind, what you said there,
Yes.
that a black person could feel uncomfortable about the teaching of race history in the US.
Very much so. To the point, just recently, I said to one of my daughters, uh, if it gets that bad, you have my permission to excuse yourself from the class, and we would deal with what happens beyond that. When the teachers say house slave or field slave, which one would you rather be? Neither. But now you're the black kid in the class, and you're expected to answer that question, and a class full of white students. But now we want to make these laws that so that the white kids won't feel bad about themselves or their ancestors. Really, we just got to teach the ugly truth, whatever it is, and allow for the students to see what America has been, and hopefully can see how to make America a better place uh, in the future. But some of the assignments were so insensitive to the black students, it just blew my mind. And
Mm.
to the point where, yeah, if you want to skip that class today, I totally understand, daughter. Because there was no consideration for making it real, making it authentic. It was just making it just easy. Well, they pick cotton, really, but no one talks about how horrible the conditions were and what all the enslaved people had to endure during that period. So my thing is, teach the ugly truth, or are you just gonna miss the real history in America if you don't teach the ugly truth about it? And some people will feel uncomfortable. I
Yeah.
mean, certainly it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable, but then you got to understand this is America. This is who we were then, and in some ways not much better now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because you're not equipping children, regardless of their ethnicity, with meaningful um, with a good understanding of their nation if you do not teach the truth of the United States um, and all of its ugliness. And because of those things that really did happen historically, Kevin, it puts us in a place where we are today. So when a child asks, well, why are things like they are today, and they don't know what that history is, you have completely missed the mark as an educator. You have set aside for by and large, let's just call the elephant what it is, for political reasons, political expediency. You have set aside the feelings for this one ethnic group, to the detriment of another, and really it hurts the whole when you take a look at it. And that's unfortunate because the history needs to be seen for what it is. It is ugly, it's depraved. There's wickedness, there's darkness, there's evil, but there's hope. There's hope immersed in that as well. When you talk about, from my perspective, the heroes of democracy, I'm thinking of Harriet, I'm thinking of Sojourner, I'm thinking of Martin, I'm thinking of all of these people who lived out the true meaning of the creeds of America. I'm thinking of all these folks who understood those principles and they lived them out for all of us to be a better society. So it's really a detriment to our country and our children when we try to cherry pick what we teach them and what we don't. And by the way, critical race theory has been around for, I think, about 40, maybe 40 plus years. And now all of a sudden it's a topic.
Mm-hmm. It was
Interesting
never
in that
a
time.
thing. Yeah, it was never a
Yeah.
thing for the schools. It was not, we were not taught critical race theory in school. Isn't it like something that you get taught in law school as a part of your dissection of the like just when you're looking at systemic laws and that sort of thing? And it was just that, it was a theory, right? But somebody decided to hijack it for, like you said, Chuck, for political gains, because it works, right? It's like you scare the people. Like, oh my gosh, they're getting taught this.
Yes.
It's just like, whoa, time out.
Yes.
I personally, Kevin, I have really gone on a journey about this. And somebody kind of threw out, so in the black community, you have a group of folk called the Hoteps. And the Hoteps, I'm not going to really go into detail about them. You can kind of Google it and get an idea of who the Hoteps are, but they kind of take some things and they kind of make you think. Like, for instance, one of the things that they'll talk about is who really were the Egyptians in the Bible really as bad as they were made out to be, right? Because we hear the narrative about the Egyptians persecuting the Jews and that sort of thing. And one of the conversations that they do is they start saying, think about the fact that what we have in our Bible is a white man's translation of the Bible. That's why I'm a very big proponent of if you're in a position to teach the Bible, to learn the original languages so that you can kind of glean from that. But anyway, I'm not saying whether or not I agree or disagree. The point I'm making is they actually have you thinking about, wait a minute, are some of these things there because of they're really supposed to be there, or are they there because it was an agenda? For instance, we know that James, his name is not James, it's Yaakov, right? But the King James, when he did the English translation of the Bible, he wanted to have his name in the Bible, so there we have it, right? It's Yaakov. It's not supposed to be James, but yet we've given him that name, and that has transcended time. So I think sometimes what happens is we as parents tend to project our issues onto our kids, right?
I have no issues.
You have no issues. But you don't understand, like when a kid falls, right?
I do that. Yeah.
A kid will fall, right? A baby will, like a young toddler will fall, and they're like, don't even realize they're hurt. And we're like, oh my God. And they start crying, not because they're hurt, but because we told them they should cry, right? And I just think that sometimes we have these insecurities that exist, and that's what we're starting to see play out now. It's like you're feeling uncomfortable because this is the perspective that you're starting to glean, and the perspective that you once had, you're starting to find out is not total reality, right? That you were raised to think that America was this beautiful place. The history of America is just so beautiful. It was ugly. How many times in elementary school during Thanksgiving time did we get the pictures of the Indians and the Pilgrims having a peace meal together and kumbaya? No, that was not what happened. Like, right. So and then here's the other piece of it. The settlers came here because they were dissatisfied with where they were. And it was not all just about religious freedom, right? It was other things that were going on. That was a part of it. And that's what's sexy. That's what makes people say, okay, I have to ride with that. So tell the whole story, and let's talk about cause and effect. We live in a world where people want to say, well, if so-and-so had done this, then we would have had that. Right now, President Biden's getting blamed for what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, right? Because they're saying, had he done this, this wouldn't have happened. But the same folk that are saying that don't want to address the fact that the opportunity for Black Americans to have generational wealth and to be in the conversation with the Bill Gates and the Elon Musk and all of those were sabotaged back early on in things like the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We've watched the movie about Rosewood. There are over 90 different events that happened through the course of early American history where the opportunities for Black Americans to have this generational wealth passed down was taken away. But nobody wants to talk about that. And my question becomes, why? Why don't you want to talk about it?
Which, I had never heard about Tulsa. I may have said this the last time we talked, like a year and a half ago, was the first I had ever heard of Tulsa. Never heard of it. Yeah. I had a professor at college teach history that the Civil War was over states' rights.
Oh yeah,
you probably know.
Oh my goodness,
about.
We both took that class.
He was a we may have been in the same class together. He was a Robert E. Lee fan.
Oh yeah. My!
I didn't know at that time. Like I ate it up, because I didn't know any better.
Kevin, look, I sat and got in. I'm just gonna say it was a class called God in Church, right? And it was basically the indoctrination of us to understand the Baptist church history. And I waited till the very last day to find out were they ever going to talk about how this man, the founder of the organization that we were in, a part of, that helped found Cedarville, I guess. And I'm sorry, I'm saying it, my bad. But that helped found it, and
I don't think they claim either of us. They probably claim you. They do not claim me.
No, they don't claim me either. So there's that. But the thing about it is, it was praised. We were supposed to praise this man. He was this great historical figure. And finally, I raised my hand. I said, "Are we going to talk about the fact that he was one of the ones that was vocal about not accepting the Black conservatives into this denomination to the point where they had to form their own?" There was a group of Black Baptists who did not want to go the progressive route, wanted to stay conservative, and that's where they were. And they were not allowed to join that organization, and they had to form their own. Right. And then this organization, 40 years later, to be fair, they did come back and they had like a joint conference where they apologized and they had some semblance of that. But those are things that nobody even, you didn't think to talk about this?
Yeah.
So my question becomes, why? Why are you not willing to talk about it? And I think that, my friends, when we want to talk about why we're so upset and up in arms about CRT and that sort of thing, why is it that you don't want? And don't use the whole, it's going to scare them, because you will take them to a PG-13 movie. They've watched every single Marvel movie out there. They know all about the blip and all that stuff and Thanos and all that, but you can't teach them about the actual history of our country. I personally have a theory that that's a part of another thing that I'm going to keep to myself now, because I don't want to get you taken off the airwaves. But it frustrates me, as you can see.
Mike, I don't know how we can go forward until we hear about what happened historically, realistically, until we deal with it. I mean, it's like, Kevin, it's like you and Sally or me and Carla talking about an issue and working through it. And you know how you peel back the layers. You peel back the layers and you get into, what's the core, what's going on here. And our nation has got to face the reality that until we do this, we may not make very much progress. And I think I mentioned this last year about the timeline. You think about the timeline of the United States, 400 years of enslavement, or 300, 250 some odd years of enslavement, Reconstruction, very small amount of time, Jim Crow, civil rights. Here we are now, free after civil rights. When you think about it, right? I mean, because we couldn't vote, couldn't do lots of things, but that just happened. There are people maybe listening to this who were alive. I wasn't by a few years, but in reality, we've come a very short amount of space, and we've got a long way to go. But part of it are conversations like these, and really just dealing with reality. We've got to deal with it. We've got to talk about it and embrace it for all its ugliness. It will make us a better nation. It really will.
Absolutely.
So there's one group of people who famously recently have seemed to not want to deal with it. White evangelical Christians, specifically around this idea of CRT and critical race theory. But really, we all kind of know that what that means is CRT is just, I think, Mike, you may have said it, an umbrella term for anything to do with race that we don't like. And I think probably the strongest proponents of avoiding anything to do with CRT, with race, with education and history have been our brothers and sisters, white Christians. I don't know any other way to ask this other than how has that felt?
Disappointing. because when I look at what it means to be a Christ follower, it means to love, to from a biblical sense of love, the agape stuff, the real stuff, the sacrificial love of Christ, giving up himself for others. It's about family. It's supposed to be about family in the body of Christ, and brothers and sisters are suffering and have. But to answer it just quickly, Kevin, it's been very disappointing to get beyond surface and to move into the depths of where we need to go. And of all people, you would think and you would hope. And I read your question. It said Christians' response. I dare say there's probably a word that needs to be inserted, maybe white Christians' response to all of this, because and hey, I mean, I love my brothers and sisters, but there has been, and it hadn't just been now. If you look back over history, there's been this reluctance to move into the mess, so to speak, from my perspective, to really deal with those things, and that's been very disappointing.
Human nature is to be comfortable as much as we can be comfortable, right? And I think that this conversation is very uncomfortable for our white brothers and sisters in that arena. And to be honest with you, and after some of my conversation, I think it's two words, and this sounds awful, but and bear with me with this. I think it is the concept of white supremacy. And we talk about, oh my gosh, you're saying, I think when people think of white supremacy, they think of KKK. I think it goes a little deeper than that, in the sense of the concept of white is always right, right? The only reason why George Floyd became a thing was because white folks said it was okay to be upset about this, right? There was still Trayvon Martin. There was still all these other cases that have been going through the thing. We're telling you stories about how we're being mistreated. But now, because you see it for yourself, oh, well, then something has to be done because that's not right. Well, wait a minute. We've been telling you for years, for decades, that this is what's been going on. And so there's this idea of, no, we can't be wrong. We can't be wrong. Look, over in the Ukraine, there's a situation now where there are African immigrants who were rightfully in the Ukraine to study, or for whatever reason, they're not being allowed into Poland to get through. There's a refugee crisis amongst those who are dark and brown, not even just Africans, but anybody who looks non-white. That is white supremacy. They're being told you have to wait for all Ukrainian nationals first, and then we'll consider letting you through. It's not just an issue here. It is all over the place. And so now I suspect, and this is something to really think about, is some of this stuff is because America is truly becoming a place where the white race is not the majority. And I think that scares folk because it makes them uncomfortable. And that may sound harsh, but I think so. I think that's where some of this conversation is. I'm now starting to feel uncomfortable. Why on earth would we go out of our way to fix voting laws that didn't need to be fixed? Texas will always stay conservative, will always stay red. Like, why are we even going out of our way to disenfranchise even more people in spite of it? Because of that thing, there's a very good possibility that if we don't put everything in place to fix this, we're going to stay out of control. And I think that is the issue. And so I think that's where the heart issue comes into play of what really is. We're comfortable with how the world is. We're comfortable with how we feel about how we feel, right? And so we're going to go ahead and do what we're going to do. And I think I think Josephine, Chuck, and I'm not trying to speak for them, but I think that we've all kind of resolved that that's just the world we live in, and we just have to learn how to navigate in it. So while Chuck is disappointed, I'm disappointed that my classmates, right, the ones that I was with, that got to know me, that we lived in the dorm together, I'm disappointed in them because they've spent all this time learning who I was, But yet when the time came for me to say, hey, I need you to stand up for me and my and what we're fighting for, they're not willing to do it because it makes them uncomfortable. And that's the part where I think that we have to start looking at is let's call it what it is.
Mm.
It is white is right. Like that's just it. Like you're the one that determine what we do. You've set the rules to the game. The game is changing, so now you got to adjust the rules to make sure you win. That's what it looks like. And I think that that's a conversation that needs to be had. And I think that goes deeper than that. What I love about you, Kevin, is that you don't care. You say, look, you call an ace of spade an ace of spade. That's why I rock with you. That's why we're here now, because you're willing to have this conversation. If you weren't willing to have this conversation, then it'd be like, all right, let's I'm not going to do it. Look, we look at multicultural churches. My job at Cedarville was to work in that arena. And to be honest with you, I kind of got turned off of it. And here's why. Because most of those settings I got into, it was we had to do it this particular way and exclude the other ways of doing it, right? They're wrong because I have to be right. And more often than not, it was the white way to do it.
Man, Mike, I tell you, that phrase, white is right, just hit me upside the head. And part of it is I feel like there's still that embedded in my DNA. Just from the earliest stages, like there are moments where I still feel that, where I sense that in me, and I loathe it. I'm thankful to say it's not often anymore that I feel like I encounter a thought or a situation or something where I realize that my perspective on this or my feelings or emotions are because of a white is right, the way a white person does something or their view on something is better or is preferable. But there are moments where that still rises up in me and I hate it. My fear, Mike, is I wonder what moments I don't catch. Where it's still there and I act in that way. But man, when you said and explained white supremacy through white is right, I mean, it was just like a Rubik's Cube, something shifted into place in my head. I was just like, light bulb. Wow. That's such a much better way to think about that from a white person's perspective, because when you say white supremacy, you think KKK, and we still act in those ways in a lot of ways, but saying it white is right made me stop and think about it in a way I've never thought about it before. Thanks.
And Kevin, I'm gonna help you, and I'm not trying to overtake this, so I'll be quiet after this. But I have a sarcastic spirit about me. Like my love language is sarcasm. Like we could be sarcastic. If I'm mad at you, you will know I'm mad at you, but I will play like I'm mad at you, but I'm not really mad at you, right? I'll tell you, Kevin, I don't like you right now, right? That's real. Right? But if I'm just treating you funny, that's because I love you. I'm sarcastic. Well, one of the things I have a tendency to do as well is I have a tendency to say things like, all right, Josephine, you had your book, right? I would say, Josephine, you know what? I went to Amazon and I bought your little book, right? I see your little book out there. I see your little book. Or Kevin, I did your little service today. Like I did your little service, right? I'll say something like that. And I don't mean anything by it. It's not meant to be condescending. It's not meant. That's just how I talk, right? And that's a culture that I live in, where it's like, I saw your little post on Facebook, and you say that. Well, my wife, being who she is, she's from the Midwest, right? And she's very literal. One day I said something like, I heard your little song. It was nice. And she said, what? Like, little song? And I said, no, it was nice. She said, you're being funny. I said, no, I'm not. And she said, well, sometimes when you use that, it comes across as you're belittling the situation, right? And I was like, I don't mean that. So what I started doing, here's what happened. As I started moving into it, because she put that in my brain, whenever I would start doing it, I became aware of it. Now, I didn't necessarily change right away. I still from time to time say it, but I'm very mindful of it from time to time. Why? Because now I'm aware that it happens. And I think that the point in this, I think what's nice about this conversation is instead of us going back and saying, no, that doesn't exist, that's not right. Let's go back and just start watching. Let's just start watching. Let's be aware. And what I love about you, Kevin, is that you're like, we'll say something, hey, think about this. And I'm not telling you, you know what, you need to change everything that you do right now. Just be aware that it's there. And I guarantee that what'll start happening is you'll start having a subtle shift, because you're just going to start being aware of the fact that it's not just about how you're perceiving it, but how others are perceiving it. And I think this is one of those instances. I challenge our white listeners, especially, to start being just aware of it. I'm not saying that you need to go ahead and just accept everything that we just said, but be aware that it is a possibility instead of just ruling it out, and start being aware and just start watching. And I think that that's going to revolutionize some people's thinking, because they don't even realize that it exists. And so I'm gonna be quiet now.
Well, I think it's such a great principle, and I'm sure Chuck and Josephine want to jump in, but it's such a great principle because it plays in other arenas. Absolutely. As a male. Oftentimes, I think my opinion is right, and the word for that is mansplaining.
Yes, mansplaining.
Sometimes as a pastor, I'm talking to a congregate, and it's like, pastor is right. Customer service, the customer is always right. Well, they're wrong. Right. The boss treats you, the boss is. So we have these things in our life where we translate, whatever position we're in. We feel like we're right because of our education or our position or our gender. But applying that to race, I think, is maybe that's something that white folks like I need to do, is say, I can recognize maybe that I have felt as a female, like a man talking to me felt like he was right. Or as an employee, I felt like a boss just because of position felt like they were right and I knew they were wrong. Well, maybe I can apply the same thing to race and say, I wonder if I'm on the opposite side of that sometimes in my life, where my whiteness, I speak or think from a position of rightness that isn't. It's a creation of my own mind. I love it.
Mike, you're sort of like the pastor. You just keep going on and on. I don't know when to say amen or when to be quiet. But that the sense of entitlement among white people just sometimes blows my mind. I suffer tremendously with RA. So because of that, I have designated parking. So someone moves in, in the next unit. She takes the parking space that's designated for me. She stays there for days on end. One day I said to her, I said, this is designated for me. And I said, because I have, I'm sorry, ma'am. I said, okay, thank you. Because I have this condition, I really need to make sure that I have this park. Immediately, she became the victim. Well, I didn't have anywhere else to park. And besides that, I have handicap placard. And I don't have time for this morning. Well, ma'am, you know that this is my designated park. A few minutes later, she's calling the police on me. Guys, I've never had the police call on me before in my life. Blew my mind. Wow. But that sense of entitlement and white is right, and you got to be wrong because you're not white. Yeah. And you're invading my space now. And
yes.
It just blew my mind that she couldn't see that what she had done was wrong. She knew that the park was designated for me. She knows that she doesn't live in this unit where I live. So what would make her think that just because she had handicap parking and that she had nowhere else to park, that she could come over here and take the space that she knew had to be designated for someone else? So that white privilege, white entitlement, it is so real. I mean, it just blew my mind that all of a sudden she became the victim and I had somehow mistreated her. So I guess that is white is right, I guess.
Is there a tendency to think that white people are always wrong from a Black perspective because of how pervasive you've been treated? I mean, I think it's.
No, I mean,
I don't know that I'd ever give a white person the benefit of the doubt.
I think I could, if she were right.
Well, and not just your situation. I just meant, I'm just thinking. I mean, the amount of things that I've heard the stories over the years that you all have been through just because of your color. If it were me, I don't think that I would ever be able to think that I could be loved or be respected or be treated as a human being by somebody who was white. I have to say it that way. I'm horrified.
I would think, at least for all of us, because I know we all share the same faith, that there's liberation in being a Christ follower where you cannot just, I mean, and you can't have those prejudices of someone just because of their skin color.
Yeah.
So because someone is white, and you're speaking truth, I mean, if it's truth, it's truth, regardless of the historical woes or entitlement and the evil that may have been perpetuated by someone who just so happened to share the same ethnicity. That's not you, Kevin. That's someone else who's done that. And I think, and I don't think it's conditioning, but I can only speak for myself, is because I have to live in a diverse world. I have to understand how to deal with people who don't look like me most of the time, particularly at work and at church and elsewhere. That you see people, you see them for the suit that they wear, right?
Yeah.
Meaning their skin. But you see beyond that as well. You see them for the individuals that they are. So you see it all. It's not like I don't see your color. I see that. But I also see that, Kevin, you're a white male who grew up in Ohio, who's pastored, who loves his family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're all of those things.
Yeah. I've, like you said, Josephine, I've never had the police called on me because of my color. And it may be hard for me to understand a perspective of relationship with law enforcement. It's hard for me to sometimes comprehend a Black perspective of law enforcement and of those situations, Josephine, that you went through, because it's never been a situation for me where my whiteness put me at a disadvantage. I think in a situation like that where with the law, and so it's very difficult for me to know and understand what that feels like, other than through stories like yours, Josephine. And it just breaks my heart that anybody would ever experience something like that. And I know that your story is one of probably hundreds, maybe thousands, that happen every single day in the U.S.
And the sad part about that, it could have ended very badly for me. And that's what really gets me. It's not.
What do you mean? Explain that to me. What do you mean by it could end badly for you? Because I think that's such I don't know what that means.
Here I am a Black woman. She's a white woman. She's calling the police saying that maybe I'm being combated or whatever. She's afraid of me and intimidated by me for some reason. Police shows up. They're going to go directly to her to see what her story is. If I get a chance to explain anything, it's after they've heard her story and wiped her tears. And when the white women start crying, that's a whole that's an entirely different story for the
as a male. I have no comment on that. But
that's right.
I think I might know what you mean.
Yeah, so she started crying and telling how she was so intimidated by me and she meant no harm, and I was freaking her out or whatever. It would have been bad for me. Now, I've never ever been in any kind of legal trouble, not that I know of. So yeah, the worst case scenario, I may have gotten a ticket, but it could have, an easy case scenario, I guess, but it could have meant that I was in jail for what, disorderly conduct or whatever they do. All of that because she says that she felt threatened or intimidated by me, even though she clearly knew that she was in the wrong. So I could have been the one. You see it all the time. Black person get the police call for minor things because the white woman is crying. Next thing you know, it's bad. It's really bad.
So she clearly knew she was in the wrong, which means that the only reason she placed the call was out of fear? Or just...
I don't know why she would have placed the call, to be quite honest. I have no idea. The next thing I know, because we were in the conversation, next thing I know, she's on the phone and looking at my tag number, to give the police my tag number. Clearly she knew better, because she admitted, where I had nowhere to park and I have handicap placard. And then she said, well, I'm sorry, but I had nowhere to park, and I do have handicap placards, so I should have been able to park here, although I know that it's not where I live.
Wow. So I almost you all have pointed this out, that these things have been going on a lot longer than George Floyd. And I'll apologize again. I wish I had been awoken to these things so much earlier, but I wasn't. And so I feel like I'm still a toddler, when it comes to understanding and processing and being helpful. But one of the things that I have wondered as I've watched, from George Floyd to Ahmaud Arbery to several other situations over the last few years that have just kind of come up on the radar. And there have been so many others I know that have happened that even don't make the news. Are things getting better, or are they getting worse from your perspective? Because I feel like for me and some people around me, awareness is heightened, but I also look at what's going on, and I don't know that I have a sense that racism and some of these issues that we've been talking about are moving forward and healing and getting better. And I hope that I'm wrong, but I don't know how to assess the state of things because I don't have a long enough history with it to really see. So what do you think?
I think it's getting exposed more. And because we didn't always know what was going on around the world as we know now, I think so I don't think we really have a gauge where we were then as opposed to where we are now, because Rodney King was the first video we had of something. And so moving forward from that, what has that been? Maybe 30, 40 years ago. So that's the only gauge we have. And nowadays we see it more often because now everybody has the capability of recording it. But what was happening and that never got recorded, who knows? So I don't know that we have a gauge of how well we are doing or how poorly we are doing when it comes to race relations.
Well, I'm the question about whether or not it's gotten better, I don't know how to answer that, because while I wasn't surprised, there was a level of shock when the text messages were revealed of the Ahmaud Arbery killers, and when doing the federal civil rights cases. And I was like, whoa, like this is still a thing, right? This is still a thing. And so I don't necessarily know that it's getting better. I have to agree with Josephine that it's just getting more exposure, and it just looks different. I think it just looks different. I mean, just the vitriol that existed about the Supreme Court nominee, right? It just looks different. Like it's the argument changes. I know that Nilo asked in the comments about what voting laws need to be fixed because it's keeping people of color disadvantaged versus progressive liberals trying to take power. And, there's little subtle things. Like, for instance, in Georgia, and Chris, you probably can attest to this better than me. I'm sorry, not Chris, Chuck. I have a friend named Chris that lives. Chris
I know
Davis,
what you meant.
Yeah. That there were I think they were called Hallelujah caravans or something like that, where after church on Sunday, they would take a busload of folk to the polls to vote for early voting, and things like that have been they've been taken out of they've been made illegal. You're not allowed to do that, or you're not allowed to, there's an issue in Texas where the voting, the applications, there's only a certain amount of applications that can be picked up from each precinct. And once those are out, you can go online and you can print them up right offline. Well, if people don't have access to the internet or printers, and then what they're saying is that when they're taking them in, because they weren't printed the right way, they're being thrown out. But they're not letting people know that they've been thrown out until after the fact, because they're collecting them and they're saying everything's okay, but then they're throwing them out later. So then you haven't had a chance to rectify it. And so when we say things like, well, what exactly is disadvantage? Is a whole lot you're disadvantaged.
Absolutely.
You're disenfranchising folk.
Absolutely. And you think about about the timing of when these laws came into fruition. It happened literally like over a period of a couple of months after the outcome of the last presidential election.
Yeah.
That's not by accident.
No.
That's not by
No.
accident. That it makes it much more, more difficult for citizens to vote. You don't do that in a democracy unless you just don't want them to vote. And one thing that I was just thinking is that racism will never expose itself as racism. So let's get beyond the
Good job.
just the simplistic way of thinking about racism. It's never going to say this is racism.
That's interesting because that's
Never.
all I hear from the white communities. I'm not racist, but you are. I'm thinking of one or two people in particular.
I mean,
That's a
it will
fascinating
never.
statement. Racism never exposes itself as racism. Is that how you said that?
No. Yeah. I mean, it's just a reality. And then, I mean, so it's like proof is in the pudding. Actions speak louder than words. All of those things we learned in kindergarten. If it looks like a snake and it sounds like a snake, might just be a snake. So let's skip all the pleasantries and really deal with the fact at hand and see what the outcomes of these of this legislation is. Let's see what the outcome of these comments are. Just from various political parties. I won't just hone in on one, but look at the movements that are going on right now within the country, within particular political parties, and who that's drawing to the table. And in times past, you would never have those groups around a political platform, but now it's like a magnet, and we continue to see, from a political perspective, this country being torn right down the middle. And that's unfortunate.
And to be clear, I want to make sure people understand too, what is it? I get them mixed up, the right and left. So the left has its drama too. Like, let's make, it has its thing. So I'm not denying that. I do think that, you alluded to this a little earlier about some of the riots and stuff that came up in result of the George Floyd situation, right? And there were people who were, tearing things apart. There are always going to be agitators. Martin Luther King talked about that. He talked about, that there are going to be some folk who are going to hijack a cause to, to go ahead and do their mayhem. Very small percentage of it, but it only takes a little bit to make the water dirty, right? And so I think that we always have to recognize that there's going to be another side to it. But what you said is right. It doesn't always look like, it doesn't say, haha, racism has entered the room. No, but it's just, right. It's a subtle thing that just creeps up, and it's like, bam, there it is.
Yeah, same end in mind.
Same end in mind.
So Cameron is watching, 9 years old, and it made me think, because I have kids. My youngest is 6, and then I think it's 10, 12, 13. I hope none of them are watching because they all get mixed up. What does a 9-year-old boy, white, do to be a part of helping? Can't vote, probably doesn't understand all of the nuances of U.S. history and so a lot of things that you all are talking about and have been through, but wants to do the right thing, wants to make a difference. What do you say to a young kid? How do they do well? How do they do better than I did at that age? Was that a stumper?
That is a little for me. Because, really, Kevin, I think 9-year-old, when I think about a 9-year-old, they're still so, what grade is that? Is that like
third
or fourth?
Third or fourth. They're aware maybe of some, some racial things, but they're still in that innocent stage. I think, oh man, I just, for kids like that, just to be a kid and to not be influenced so much. Thank you for that. Fourth grade. So not to be influenced so much by um, group think. I mean, teach your kid to be an independent thinker, because shortly thereafter, after the fourth grade, you're going to see kids going to the different parts of the cafeteria and sitting amongst, you know, themselves. And it may have already started in the fourth grade. So I'd just say, hey, be an independent thinker and befriend everyone, regardless of, of your similarities or dissimilarities, but just be friendly to everyone, because I think that's where the progress will be made in that proximity, as Brian Stevenson says. So I love that so much. Proximity is so important. So you want to stay proximate to people who may not look like you and who don't look like you, quite frankly, because in the reality in our nation, if you're from particular communities, particularly I'll just talk about white folks, right? More than likely, you're going to be around white people more often than you are around other ethnicities. So, but for other ethnicities, it's not so much like that. We have to be around others in order really to survive. So I just say that's a long, drawn-out way to saying for kids just to be independent thinkers and to reach out to people who don't per se maybe look like them.
I think that there is what I love about. I look at my son, and my son is just turned 10, so he's in that age group. I looked at him, and there he starts to ask questions now. He asks questions about when the George Floyd thing happened. He asked questions about that, and he is eager to know about those things. But I will tell you that he also, because he goes to a Christian school that's predominantly Black. And so they take the Abeka curriculum. So if any of y'all are familiar with it, take the Abeka curriculum, but then they also like add Black history components to it. Like, so for instance, when they have to do biographical sketches and stuff like that, there's a underlying Black history curriculum that goes throughout the year as well. So he is aware of that. And I think that what's important is to just allow them to glean the world, right? To just take it in as it is. Because remember that these kids are growing up with a different dispensation. First of all, we grew up, the chances of a Black man becoming the president of the United States were non-existent. I remember being in the second grade when I told my second grade teacher that I wanted to be the president of the United States when I grew up, and she told me, baby, that just will never happen. I went home and told my mom that, and she said she's telling the truth. And so that was the reality we lived in. We knew that the opportunity for a Black man to become president of the United States was just non-existent.
That's awful.
Well, it was truth. It was reality. It was. I
it's
hear
awful.
you. I hear you. But that was the reality we lived in. And so,
I mean, I am so telling a child.
Yeah, you just grew up thinking that. So to see so my son, he doesn't know the United States without a Black man as a president. He doesn't know the United States as a Black woman as the vice president, right? Regardless of where we're at politically, it's just there's no limit to what they can do, right? So right there, their world is just totally different now. And so I think that one of the things we do have to recognize is that our kids are so resilient, and let's face it, they've seen some stuff that we've never experienced for ourselves. And I think sometimes we project things onto them. Like I said earlier, we want to protect them, but actually they think about it. School shootings, while they were happening, they weren't happening like they happen now. That's a part of their lives now. A part of their lives is to have to go through a school shooting drill. All we have are fire drills, right? They have a situation now where they're just seeing that the world is so much more connected because of just how media is set up, social media, the news and that sort of thing. They just went through one of the most traumatic exercises that we've ever experienced in our history with COVID-19. Think about how many people that they knew personally that are dead, right? That are dead now. And so I think that sometimes we have to give our kids a little bit of credit that they're a lot more resilient than we let on. And so sugarcoating things for them, we can't afford to. Like, I have to tell my son, like, dude, if you see a police officer and you're driving, you keep both hands on the steering wheel and you make sure you're very clear that you don't make any sudden movements, because that could end your life. It's a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just it. And so when we talk about the inequities of life, and it's like, you don't want your kids to hear about Harriet Tubman. You don't want your kids to read what's the book that they took off the list? That they
which book haven't they?
Which one? Stand from the Beginning, Ibram Kendi, 1619.
We have to live it. Like, these kids are seeing this day, but they're hearing about this happening. I think that we need to give them more credit.
It's interesting, Mike. You say kids grow up in a world now where they can be president, but they don't grow up in a world where they can take their hands off the steering wheel. To me, that's like that just blows my mind. Like, now they can be president, now they can be vice president, now hopefully they can be a Supreme Court justice, but they can't wear a hoodie, at nighttime. They can't take their hands off of a steering wheel.
That's right.
I feel like, for me, helping my white kids understand that the black kids and other race, color kids in their school deal with those things is important, that my kids recognize that the world they live in is not the same world that their friends live in, that their friend may have the freedom to become president, but not to put their hands in their pockets around a police officer.
You have to be very conscious of it. I mean, just the fact that you have to be conscious of it it's a difference in and of itself.
I don't know where to go from here. I think it's such an important thing, though. For parents, whenever the Ahmaud Arbery verdict was released, we made sure that the kids were sitting around the television watching that. We were sitting around watching it whenever the nomination for the Supreme Court justice come up. And I don't want to pretend like I try to baptize my kids into these social issues or things, but I do feel like I know that my kids go to a pretty highly conservative Christian school. And I know that they're receiving one perspective from their friends, sometimes on things. And I want to make sure that they have a different lens to look at things through. And sometimes I'll ask questions or challenge them in ways that I don't even necessarily agree or think, but I want them to be able to think critically and to see other perspectives and other viewpoints on things, to make sure that they take their lens off and put other people's lenses on. And when it comes to race, I just think it's so important in America for them to do that.
It is. It's very important. Need more parents like you, man.
Absolutely.
Well, my wife's a better parent than I am.
I say that about my wife too, so I totally get it, Kevin.
Same.
Totally
I can vouch for that.
So, I mentioned Ahmaud Arbery, and I think we're running out of time. I don't want to necessarily take too much of your all's night and evening. But one of the things that was an interesting thing to me was the role that Jesse Jackson played in the Ahmaud Arbery trial, and how the judge tried to have him removed from the courtroom, and how in the African American church and context here in the U.S., there is a lot of crossing of lines between faith, between politics, and between activism. And for a lot of white people, that is difficult to understand and comprehend. But I'll also say even it's outright wrong in a lot of people's minds for it to be that way. Pastors should not be that way, that politics and faith don't go together, that activism shouldn't be a part of that. And give me a different lens to see faith and politics and activism through.
Well, one thing about it, the white politicians have never had a problem showing up at the black church during election time. When
Amen.
for as long as I can remember, and let me tell you, I've worked on quite a few campaigns. They always showed up, and not only did they show up, they disrespected the services. But now they have a problem with politics in the church. That doesn't fly with me.
Not at all.
So there, and in addition to that, when it comes to I need my charger. When it comes to I think black people in politics and activism, we've always done it through the church because that was the only place we had was in the church. And that's where we met to do, to do whatever we had to do as far as politics goes. So I think I don't have a problem with it. But what I like to see is that candidates respect it, and they don't want to respect it. What they want to do is show up, get their 5 minutes of fame with the congregation, and then leave.
Yeah, that was interesting to me. Well, I didn't know what you meant by that the white politicians or the white people didn't respect the black church when they were there, and I don't know what that means. What does that look like?
They come in, they do their thing, and then they leave. They don't even participate in the worship. They even talk about how it's a spectacle. They make it even sound like it's a foreign country. They'll go in like, "Oh, wow. I love it when I get to go to these churches." Like seriously, like dude, like. What are you talking about? We worship the Lord like everybody else does.
Exactly. I've seen it time and time. I've worked on campaigns, and I've had my candidates in the black churches. But what I've always said to them, if you're going to go to a black church and I'm going to present you, then what you're going to do is sit here and worship with us. And experience who we are in worship. And one of my main candidates, he came to really appreciate that time because what he did, he got a chance to really see the people, and he got a chance to appreciate what we do in worship. But for so many years, they would just come in, spend 5 minutes, and go to the next church, make their rounds before we leave church, and they've visited maybe 5 or 6 churches with no consideration for who the people are. But in my world, if you want to go to a black church, you ought to be willing to stay for worship and engage with the congregation after worship. That's the way we do it, and that's the way they should do it.
Yeah, I mean, Josephine, amen. Because historically speaking, the black church was the place that you gathered. Like that's why the black church experience is just a part of the culture. It was the place where you gathered. Historically speaking, that's why you went in that morning, you got out late. Early evening sometimes, and depending on the occasion, you may have eaten there and then gone back for the second service without even stepping outside. I mean, that is the experience. And so the black church. So yeah, I don't buy that. I think that is one of those things where people want to have selective amnesia, because it's used. The church is used as a platform to get agendas across. All across the board. So if we're going to say we shouldn't do this for this, then you know what? Stop doing the other rallies. Stop doing this. Stop doing that, because they do it too. I call what on that.
They just do. The little voter guides they pass out, voter registration.
Right. They come on now. Y'all do what y'all do. I mean,
but Mike White is right.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, isn't that the way we do it? Is
that's. Very well put.
You have that look as if you've never experienced that. So I assume that white candidates never show up at white churches to give their little campaign spiel.
Well, they worship at their churches. They don't worship at ours. They aren't members at ours. They're members at those churches. I'm sorry.
I would like to say
they're members at their church. They're going to become a member of our church. They're not going to do that. Why?
I think there is a perception that it's in bad taste for a politician to speak politics from the pulpit, and yet it's beginning to happen in the white church. President Trump in First Baptist Dallas recently made a huge news, a huge news cycle over that and the things that were said there. But I realized as you were talking, I think this might have been the face that you saw, Josephine, is I think I realized that it happens just as much in the white church. It just happens in a different way. A politician in a pulpit doesn't happen as often in a white church as it may in a black church. But politics from the pulpit probably happens more in the white church than in the black church. It's just not necessarily from a politician. And I think that was just an aha moment for me.
That's true.
Any other thoughts on that?
No, I'm going to keep my thoughts myself.
You're going to keep it to yourself, Mike. Well, I think we are close to being out of time. So parting thoughts, anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about, or just something that you might want to leave with us tonight. So I give each of you the floor in whatever order you want to take it.
I'll just say this. If we really want to make a difference for the future of our nation and the world, we have to be intentional about it. And you have to, engage differently and think bigger picture in terms of maybe we may not see as much progress as we like maybe in our lifetimes, but we do want to see progress. So what are those things that we can do now that can help our children, Kevin? Matthew, by the way, is like 24, and Elizabeth is 20, Tyler's 26. She'll be 27 soon, right? And when you first met my kids, they were much younger, but we have to be very intentional as a society about where we're going, because I don't know that we've done that historically, because I don't know how far we've come, to be quite honest. When you talk about progress, if there's been any, it's been very little. And things tend to happen the way they've happened historically in terms of cycles. You have a point of a lot of progress, then you have this extreme backlash. And that's what we're experiencing, I think, right now with CRT and the laws, voting rights, and all those sorts of things. So we're sort of in that same cycle. It feels like that. So we have to be intentional, and change can't wait. We've got to change now.
What I just want to say is, Chuck, whatever you are drinking or eating at your house that makes it so that you can look like that and have like 20-something-year-old kids, we need to go into business together and fund something with that.
You ought to see my wife.
Man, I'm just saying, when they say black don't crack, right, there's a great example of that. What I just have to say is, let's keep this going. Like, let's keep this dialogue going. In your circles in spheres of influence, have these conversations, be willing to have these conversations, and they can be organic. They don't have to be like to the point where you can invite a group of folk together and say, hey, we're going to have a conversation, but it doesn't have to be like, let's have the agenda, let's do this. Just make it organic. Like, we're sitting around talking around, having dinner. Hey, this is something that came up. What are your thoughts? And be open to a person's perspective, right? I can't change that you feel the way you feel, right? And I think that I have to remind myself of that too. If you truly feel this way, if you truly feel that you are inferior or superior than me because of your race, well, I'd much rather you just admit it so I know it, as opposed to just sneaking around and we have to second guess what it is. Just that way I know what I'm dealing with, right? I know this is what I'm getting. Makes sense? And I just say, own it. Own where you're at, stand on it and keep it going. But I don't think everybody is like that. I do have faith that there are a lot of people who genuinely find themselves in the middle of the road, just trying to figure out how to navigate through it. And I say that for you, if you're willing to do it, let's just talk. Let's have a conversation and be open to what you're going to hear. That's the end of my TED Talk.
Well, thanks, Kevin, for another great conversation, and thank you for being willing to put yourself in a hot seat.
Mm-hmm.
It's been an awesome evening. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
All right. Well, I hope that you guys will be willing to do it again sometime soon. I appreciate it as well.
Already know. You already know.
Got it. Anytime.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night. Y'all take care.